Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Tuesday, March 18th, which means we are one day away from Notre Dame kicking off fall camp. That's Trevor Trowbridge. I don't know if you guys remember him. He and I did a show last week, and then he was out for the last week to the point where somebody's like, is Trevor still around? I'm like, no. I joked yesterday. I was like, no, he showed me up. He did really good the week I was gone, made people forget about me, so I got rid of him. I had to say, no, you can't be showing up the boss. But no, Trevor was sick last week. So we did our best to make do without him, but he is back. He's healthy. He's ready to rock and roll, ready to talk spring ball. You'll be at spring practice tomorrow, Trevor. So it'll be your first time attending spring practice. We're going to get the first 4 periods tomorrow. So we'll see a little bit. We'll have a little bit to see. We'll talk about it on tomorrow's show. But Trev, today, you and I are going to preview spring practice for Notre Dame. And we've kind of been doing that for the last month and a half, and we'll continue to do that over the next couple of weeks to talk about spring practice. But we're going to look at it from a little bit of a different point of view, sort of a big picture right before spring. What are we looking for? What do we know about this team? What don't we know about this team? What are the objectives for Notre Dame this spring? And that's really going to be the focus of today as we get ready for Notre Dame to just really it's our first chance to see the 2025 team, sort of, because there's still some transfers are going to show up this summer and some newcomers will show up this summer. But this is our first chance to see that. First chance to see a lot of things. We're going to talk about all those. I'm excited about it. Trev, I know you're excited about it. I'm ready to rock and roll. But more importantly, man, I'm just good to have you back. Kind of down now a little bit this last week, but we're glad to have you back. You got sick at the right time. Better last week than this week, right? And better than the week before. Like, if you think about it, the week before I was gone, so I needed you to step up. This week it's spring practice, which you want to be at. You picked the right week in this time period to get sick, man. There's no doubt about it, because it was going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Shout out to the flu for picking the right time to come and bother me for about 5 days. But I'm happy to be back, man. I'm ready to get rolling on spring practice here. To me, I've always said this before I was with Irish Breakdown when I was just a fan. I mean, it's spring practice for me kind of scratches that itch a little bit. You don't get all the questions answered that you want, but you get to see them out there on practice again. You get to see people running around. You get to see players flying around. And so I'm excited for it. And now this is going to be my first spring where I get to see things from the opposite end of the spectrum here. And I'm really excited to see that. But all in all, I'm just happy I don't have a fever anymore. I'm happy that I can, enjoy some of the warmer weather that's hopefully coming here soon. And I can move around without feeling like I'm going to pass out. So the flu is no joke. Hit me pretty hard, but I'm happy to be back, man. I'm ready.
Well, good, man. I'm excited about that. So let's get started here, Trev, on spring practice, and let's get started about kind of what we're going to talk about today, which is just a sort of an overview of the spring for Notre Dame. And when you look at this team, obviously this is an important period for Notre Dame, but I think spring ball in general has taken on a different feel than it used to. Where in the past, I mean, your season ends after 13, 14 games for Notre Dame. Then there's this long period where, where you get to summer, you get to winter workouts, you get to these different parts of the season, and then there's this lull, and then it's all, and then you get this little brief period of spring ball, and then it's this other lull. Well, now it's like spring ball hasn't changed a whole lot, but it feels like the season ended so much later now than it normally does. It was 3 weeks, really, but it seems like it has. But you're now in this period where you say, well, this is such an important period of time for development for young players, and that's true. And this is a development time for whatever, this guy, that guy. But it's like they just had a whole extra month of practice, a whole extra month of the season, 3 whole extra games. I mean, if you think about it, Notre Dame played be 3 extra games than what they normally play. 13 games is the most that Notre Dame's ever played in a season. This year they played 16. That's a whole different animal than what we've seen in the past, right? It's a whole different, it's 3 weeks. It's more than 3 weeks of practice because all those games were spaced out more than a week. You got all that extra time. That's 25% of a regular season that you just got extra work in compared to what you normally do. So now spring is a little bit different. You may rest guys when in the past you wouldn't rest guys. You say, hey, look, maybe you're going to give Emil Wagner a little bit of time off this spring. Where in the past, like, dude just started 1 year. Like, he's in a position battle. Like, he needs – but it's like, no, but do we really want to wear him down? And his season's only been over 2 months and, like, less than 2 months. I mean, last game was on January 20th, right? and spring practice starts on March 18th. That's not a lot of time. And then also the additional reps that came. Instead of getting 700-800 snaps, you got almost 1,000 snaps. So all those things factor in, and we're going to look at this team and decide like, hey, where is this team at? How are they handling? Like the first big picture question I have is, what's spring going to look like in this new era of 16 game seasons? And first game of the next season starts in August. I mean, what's this new era going to look like? That's the big thing for me, Trev, even before we get into some of the other specifics about, the objectives of spring, is what's this going to look like? What's the emphasis going to be? Is it going to be as aggressive as it's been in the past? Is it going to be as important when it comes to decisions being made as it was in the past? There's a lot of things that we don't know, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
I am too. We're entering into that realm of the new normal with the expanded playoffs and teams like Notre Dame, whose goal every single season is to play more than just 13, 14 games in an ideal world. And I think you're going to see a lot of players acting a little bit on a pitch count. I don't know if you're going to see guys like an Emil Wagner, players like a Jeremiah Love, guys like a Jaden Greathouse going 100% at 100% of the reps that you would normally see if it was a 12, 13 game long season. And so that's going to be interesting to see what that dynamic looks like. I'm going to be interested to see what it looks like, how practices are structured now, how physical do things get? Is stuff going to be more install walkthrough based? Because at the end of the day, football's a violent sport. Everybody knows that. And you're still going to have some sort of combination of,
right.
I mean, we got to get the boys hitting today. But I'm sure that's going to take into account, because a lot of teams are kind of now, I think over the next couple of years, specifically this offseason and next offseason, experimenting a little bit with what that offseason looks like at the timing of starting of spring and what practices look like and how long they go. And I think it's all going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds. That's for sure.
It is. And we're going to not necessarily have all the answers because of how little we're going to be at practice, but we're going to do our best to try to talk to different sources and get some of that information to just kind of see how it goes. But there are certain things, Trevor, that no matter how much they change about the spring are important and need to be focal points of the spring, whether it is going to be a same as usual 15 practice spring or a shortened 15 practice spring. Maybe some of the practices aren't as long. Like the first practice is only going to be an hour compared to what it used to be. There's a lot of things that are going to be different, but no matter how it's structured, the main things that come out of spring that I believe are important for a football team are all still there. And that's something that we're going to focus on as we get into this first like kind of big picture segment of the show, is when you look at what are the priorities for the football team? What are the priorities for this team in camp or in this spring camp period? And the first one, and this is always, kind of my number one objective for spring, and it really starts in the winter. You see another big element in the spring, because it's one thing to do it in workouts and in meetings, but I really want to see it also happen in film sessions and now coach-led meetings and in practice, and that is leadership's got to be established. And what's interesting about this Notre Dame football team for 2025 is they didn't lose a whole lot just from a volume standpoint. When I look at some of these other teams and I see how many players they lost, starters, backups, I mean, like if you go to like Our Lads and you look at like the projected depth charts, and it's a somewhat useful tool. It's not always up to date, but it's helpful. And they'll show like first, second, third team, and then on the right they'll show all the guys that lost, the teams lost. And you'll go to some of these teams, and it's like the whole far right thing is just filled with dudes they lost, either the portal to the NFL. Notre Dame didn't actually lose a lot. I mean, on offense, they lost their quarterback. They lost two of their three starting receivers, but none of them were like dynamo players. And the guy that they got to replace them in the portal were more productive than they were. And then you get to the offensive line. You lost two guys to the portal who may not have even started next year. Defensively, you lose two really important D tackles, which is big. You lose a will linebacker, and you lose an All-American safety. You lose your nickel. That's five guys. You didn't lose a whole lot else. Well, you lost Benjamin Morrison. Yeah, but they already lost him. They played 10 games without Benjamin Morrison. Like, they already know what it was like without having him. And so you lost some good players, but you didn't lose a lot of volume. You only had 8 or 9 guys jump in the portal total. All of them were sort of expected to some degree. Then you look at it from a different standpoint. So volume, you compare what Notre Dame lost to like what Ohio State lost from their roster. You look at what Notre Dame lost to like what Oregon lost to their. It's night and day different. Ohio State's roster was way more depleted from guys going to the NFL than what Notre Dame's was, for example. But what's unique about Notre Dame's team compared to past Notre Dame teams is even though the volume wasn't high, every single guy that we would consider a big-time leader as a veteran is gone. Like, they lost all their captains. They're all gone, right? I mean, Riley was the only captain on offense. Riley Mills was a captain. He's out. Benjamin Morrison was a captain. He's gone. Xavier Watts was a captain. He's gone. And Jack Kaiser was a captain. He's gone. So leadership is a big thing here that has to be filled. And it's always important. There's certain things you can do as a coach to manufacture leadership, but to a large degree, I say this every year, Trev, it's got to be player-led. It's got to be organic. And this is a time when you learn that. So leadership has to be established for your team as a whole on each side of the ball and then each position room. And the spring is a big time for that, because if you aren't working on establishing leadership until July and August when you show up for fall camp, it's way too late. It needs to be established before then, and the spring is a big time for that. And that's something that I'm most going to be looking forward to hearing about and to a degree seeing, but also hearing about from this period of time is who steps up as the leaders of this football team, because that's going to go a long way towards determining the mentality, the culture, the attitude of this football team.
It's ripe for the taking, that's for sure, because you talk about the players that aren't on campus yet. The guys like Malachi Fields, who was voted a team captain by his teammates at Virginia in 2024. You start talking about how Notre Dame might not have lost the volume, but the impact of what they lost is great. Lost all 5 of their captains, most of their leaders on defense, a lot of the vocal leaders on defense. But based on what we heard about from last spring, there's players that now have the opportunity to elevate and take that next step and not just be that person for the position room or just the younger guys. Now they can do it for the entire side of the ball or the entire team. Guys like Jaden Greathouse, guys like Adon Schuler. That's what I'm also excited to see in this spring is, can you take that next step and be that guy where, to me, when you look at the impact of a leader, yes, it's the people around you on your side of the ball, but when you know you have a good leaders, when you have guys like, you heard defensive players talk about it last year, like outside linebackers. There'd be guys like Jaden Osbury talking about how, hey, Riley's that guy. He kind of brings us together as a team. It's like that's an impact. That is an impactful leader. You have guys like Emil Wagner talking about, hey, Zero on that side of the ball. I mean, that guy's a leader. Yeah. He brings us together. We rallied around him. That is what I'm also looking to see in the spring, because that is the one thing that's missing. We can talk about how much talent this team has all the live long day, but having that, I don't want to say proven leadership.
You need an established leader in your room. That's what you're saying. And we don't know who that's going to be. We're going to talk about some players we think that's going to be, but the reality is like last year, for example, two of the guys you just talked about. You talked about Riley Leonard is who you're talking about, correct? Mm-hmm. And then Xavier Watts, because you say Riley, I want to make sure that he wasn't talking about Riley Mills. About Riley Leonard, for example. Riley Leonard wasn't a guy that was out there in the spring practicing. But what we kept hearing was he was always kind of working. He was always kind of, he was with the guys. He was doing this, he was doing that. And you could just immediately feel like this guy stepped in and he was a leader right away. And his personality was infectious and it was simple. It was easy because you knew that's just who Riley Leonard is. Yeah. With Xavier Watts, however, that's not naturally who he is. He had to go out there and say, hey, look, this is what the expectations are of me. I have to step up my game from a leadership standpoint. And I think doing that, and he did that brilliantly, and I think it made him a better football player. because he couldn't just do his job anymore. He now had to make sure everybody knew what the expectation and what the standard was. And to see that was very encouraging for me, to see that, because it's not naturally who he is. He naturally did it. It wasn't like Marcus Freeman sat down and said, listen, Xavier, I need you to be a captain this year. He knew, and maybe Coach Freeman had that conversation with him, but I can promise you that was part of the thing Xavier knew he was getting into when he decided to come back. I assure you he knew that was going to be part of the expectation when he chose to come back. And so some guys, it's just natural. It's going to be no problem for Drake Bowen and Don Schuler to step into a leadership void on defense. It's going to be no problem for Jaden Greathouse to step into a leadership void on offense. And I would argue the same thing about Jeremiah Love. Who is that guy on the offensive line? You mentioned Emil Wagner. Is he that guy for Notre Dame this spring? Is it Billy Schrouth? Who's going to be that? Is Eli Raridan ready to kind of be that leader in the room? You're now the vet, my man. Yes, Kevin Bauman is around too, but you've played a whole lot more than Kevin Bauman because of the injuries. And I would argue that no position has a bigger question mark from a leadership standpoint than the D-line. You lost 2 All-American D tackles. Like I'm on the board today, and I keep reading these posts about people just complaining over and over and over about D tackle. D tackle's a major problem. I'm like, did you guys watch this defense the last 2 years? Like maybe in the future, but they've been pretty good there. And then you start thinking about it, but then you're like, okay, but next year those guys aren't there, Brian. So like maybe there's some legitimate concerns there, and we don't know who that playmaker is going to be. I'm like, yeah, it's a fair point. But even more so, we don't know who the leaders are going to be in that room. Jordan Botelho is not going to practice this spring. Does he step into a leadership role after the career he's had? I don't know. Is Josh Burnham ready to be that guy? Is Gabriel Rubio better? He wasn't even on the team last spring because of some certain issues. There's not that natural, oh yeah, that guy's going to be a leader at D tackle outside of maybe Donovan Heinisch. Maybe. I don't know Boubacar Traore well enough to know if he does or doesn't have that type of personality. I don't know him very well. Does he provide that? There's just what about the newcomers? Does Jared Dawson bring some of the leadership that Notre Dame got from the portal last year with Riley Leonard and Jordan Clark and guys like that? We don't know. We're going to find that out. So I think to a certain degree, Trevor, the thing I like and I'm encouraged by about this spring, but now we have to see it play out, is I'm a little bit more encouraged this offseason than I was last offseason about who that's going to be. We didn't necessarily know at certain positions, especially on offense, who the leaders were going to be. We had this conversation about who the captains were going to be last year. And we're like, okay, well, probably Riley Leonard. But after that, it's like, Jaden Thomas is kind of a leader, but he's not even a starter for you. You didn't really have that natural leadership because you were so young. Now it's like, okay, I don't know if there's going to be a leader at quarterback from the standpoint of the best quote unquote leader of the room may not even start in Steve Angeli. If he starts, then your leadership thing is kind of figured out. Can Kenny and CJ, if they win the starting job, provide that leadership? And my answer is, well, I don't know that I need them to. I just need them to do their job. That just naturally doing that will be leading. But you're in a position where if you'd have had a young guy starting last year, that would have been very problematic. I think it's a big reason why Mark Freeman went to the port, because you didn't have a lot of natural leadership. This year you do. Jaden Greathouse has established himself. He started doing that last spring as a leader. Jeremiah Love started showing that last year. Now Emil Wagner and Billy Schrouth have a year under their belt. Emil just strikes me when I listen to him talk and I see him get interviewed and you see how he conducts himself. You're just like, yeah, I kind of see him as like a future captain type of guy. He just strikes me as like that Mike McGlinchey type. That's the guy that gets up there and gives the intellectual talk in front of the room and that kind of thing, where Quentin Nelson's the grinder, go get it. Maybe that's Jagasol and Schrouth, who knows? But, receiver, we have that. Plus you're adding Malachi Fields in the fall, who was a captain at Virginia. But for right now, for the spring, who else steps up in that role? It's going to – I think the options are a little bit more clear now. And unlike last year, a lot of the options are your best players. And Drake Bowen, Don Schuler, Jeremiah Love, Jaden Greathouse. But there's got to be some others, though. Does Christian Gray kind of step into that? Does Leonard Moore, even as a sophomore, start to show some of that in that room? The cornerback room is the one I might have a big question, maybe the biggest question about after the D line is the cornerback room because it's so young. I mean, Christian Gray's now the vet in that room. Think about that, but this is where you start to see it, Trev. And also it's the two types of leaders. There's the vocal guys, and then there's the lead by how you go about your business. Some of those guys are both. Don Schuler is going to be both. Drake Bowen's both. I think Jaden Greathouse is both. Jeremiah Love, definitely lead by example guy. How much is he going to kind of get up in front of the room when booties need chewed out? I don't know about that, but who are those? There's different types of leadership, and all that's got to be established. And if it doesn't get established by the end of spring, as a coach, you start getting a little bit worried. You do.
The cornerback room is very intriguing to me, especially a guy like Leonard Moore, because you start talking about how he still needs to progress. He still needs to have a good spring. He still needs to hone in some skills. What he did last year was fantastic, but I don't believe that he is a finished product by any means. And you don't want to burden somebody heading into their true sophomore season, who is technically still a freshman right now, with the duties of like, hey, you could be a captain. Do I think he could be? Absolutely. Do I expect it to be this year? I probably not.
And who's that? Talking about Leonard Moore?
Leonard Moore.
Yeah. I don't care about captain. Just so we're clear. When I say leader, I'm not talking about captain. Like it's leadership can be something that you establish without being like Drake Bowen became a leader of that defense second half of the year. Jack Kaiser was the leader of the defense. He was the captain. He was the guy he was the emotional captain. But Drake Bowen was when the whistle started to kick the game off, that was your leader on defense. That was the guy that got everybody lined up. That was the guy that, kind of did all that. Well, now it's like, okay, now I need you to take that next step into you're doing it off the field. But that's what it encourages me about that is you don't have to be a captain to establish that leadership role. We saw that from Don Schuler in practices. He'd be like barking at other guys, like getting them lined up. And you're just like, dude, you haven't even started a game yet. And you're already like telling other dudes what to do. That's just who Don is. That's his personality. That's the big thing, Trev, is there's more of those type of guys on this roster than maybe they've had in past years. When I look around the roster, there's more of those. Now, I wish there was, I don't know who that guy is in the D line. I don't know who that guy is in the O line. But when I look everywhere else, there's guys that you point to and you're like, okay, yeah, that guy's got some of that. Like Aeneas Williams, if he's a guy that you can view as being a leader of that room someday. Even if he's not your number one back, he's a guy that kind of leads that room. You look at different players that you say, okay, that's a guy that I think is going to step up and kind of be that type of guy. But it gets established this spring. And part of that too, Trev, is, and the next part of that is from the leadership, you start to see a culture get established of your football team. And what do we mean by when we say culture? When I refer to culture from a football standpoint, I'm not talking about, like things movie is part of our modern culture, the music we listen. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm talking about what's your DNA as a football team. What are the things that you believe in? What are the things that you buy into? What are the sacrifices you're willing to make? What is your emphasis as a football team? Are you one of those teams that we look around the country and we see that you got a bunch of individuals that are focused on themselves and it's hard for them to become a team? I look at Ole Miss last year and I'm like, how does a team with that much talent lose 3 football games? Because I don't think the culture was established in a way where they were all truly bought into the team goal. When I look at look at Ohio State last year, Notre Dame, for example. Ohio State had a lot of highly ranked guys, highly ranked recruits, future high draft picks, a lot of guys that could focus a lot of guys getting paid a lot of money. We talk about how much money Ohio State's players got paid and all that kind of stuff. And there were times throughout the year where you could just see the culture wasn't really solid the way that it needed to be. But it started to kind of grow later in the year. They went through some tough times. And once they had that loss to Michigan, it was either going to make or break that football team. And we talked about this going into the playoffs. They're either going to fold because of this or this is going to be the best thing that ever happened to them. I believe that's exactly what we said going into the playoffs. But because the culture of the team was such that at the end of the day, for all the I's and the me's, there were still a lot of guys that came back for a bigger goal, a bigger picture, a bigger objective. And that kind of rallied that group together where it was no more about, hey, guys, no more about what yours and you get yours and whatever we got to do to go win this football game, we're going to go do it to win this football game. And that leadership kind of carried the day and took them over the top. We saw that with Notre Dame last year after the Northern Illinois loss. A lot of teams would have folded after that. But Notre Dame's leadership came together and said, and we even said this at the time, like, who are the leaders? Where's the leaders? Who's going to step up and lead this football team? Well, we saw that. It was Riley Leonard. It was Xavier Watts. It was Riley Mills, who, kind of started really taking his game to another level. The leadership said, no, guys, this isn't going to be us. We're not going to, nope, this isn't going to define us. We're better than this. We know who we are. Let's get back to being that way. And that leadership carried the day for both of those teams. And it was a very different journey to get to that game, but that's who they were, and that's what they became. And that's why those are the two teams at the end of the day that were playing for the championship. So the culture, the leadership leads into what your culture is. What do you prioritize? What are your most important things as a football program? Are you a team that believes in toughness? That gets established the offseason. Are you a team that believes in sacrifice? That gets established this offseason. Are you a team that knows what it's like to overcome adversity? That didn't get started in August for Notre Dame last year, Trev. That got started in the offseason. That's another thing, is if these two things don't kind of get established now, it becomes a problem really for the entire season. It doesn't get fixed in August. It just doesn't.
This is a huge one for me. And reason why I say that is last year, this team really struggled with success, really struggled handling success. And there's countless different examples of that. I mean, you win at Texas A&M, you drop your home opener to Northern Illinois. Then you can start talking about, hey, you go and you beat the brakes out of Purdue. You're back at home the next week. You struggle against Miami of Ohio for the first half. You fast forward later into the season. Defense struggled against USC. Chalk it up to a bad day. I'm cool with that. Fast forward more down into the postseason. You finally get the monkey off your back. You get your first major bowl win against a really good Georgia team down in the Sugar Bowl. And then 7 days later, you come out against Penn State and you struggled. Didn't really look focused. Get into halftime, they were able to lock in, look like a completely different football team in the second half. You don't have that leadership that's there right now to kind of correct you and say, hey, can we lock in now, please? It's time to go. Excuse me. So for me, it's going to be interesting to see this spring. What is this leadership going to look like? Because a lot of the positives from last season were a lot of young talent had to play. Now they come back a lot more experienced. Now the question is, how do they come back? Do they come back and hang their hat on, we just had the most wins in a Notre Dame season in school history, and we won back-to-back New Year's Six bowls, and we made it to the Natty, and I'm a true freshman now. I mean, imagine what is that going to look like? Is it going to be more that now that they have a lot of success and people are talking about Notre Dame again and Notre Dame's back in the limelight? Or is it going to be, we did all that work just to come up short in the national championship game? It's time to go. It's time to work that much harder. We've seen it now. We've gotten a taste of it now. Now we want the whole meal, and so that's what I'm interested to see, how this culture is going to be established. That is the one thing that you talked yesterday, what you were nervous about as far as what that competition is going to be breeding. That's my nerves going into this spring. I think they're capable of doing it. We've seen them capable of handling success. But the one fear for having such a young team is that I think it's gone. I think that they're going to overcome it because you have your guys, your leaders, like a Jaden Greathouse after the national championship said, I'm ready to get back to work. I'm ready to get back to the bend and start grinding today. I never want to feel this way again. Does that emulate with the rest of the team?
And I don't know if you saw that workout video that had Jeremiah Love in it. He's been working.
Yeah.
He looks like, okay, that cat he's putting on a little extra armor, that was good to see. But you're absolutely right, Trevor. It's what's your mentality. But now we get to start to see it. We get to start to see if that's actually going to be the case. We think it's going to be good. It's kind of like what I said yesterday when I was talking to Sean, talking about the quarterback decision. Is I think Marcus Freeman understands what has to go into this decision, but I also am still a little bit haunted by the last 30 years of Notre Dame football, where a lot of times we haven't seen that kind of manifest the right way. And so even though I have faith in it, I still have that, man, I just, I don't know. And that's what the spring is, Trev, because this is our first chance to actually get a glimpse of, okay, I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing that they're going to get there. And of course, a big part of it is no matter how much contact you have, Trev, competition is big. And Marcus Freeman talks about this all the time. This is our first chance to see competition. And what Trev and I are talking about here is not quarterback battle. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're not talking about who's going to start at this position. It's just how competitive are you as a football team? Like, nothing gets me more excited than watching spring practice, watching the offense and the defense genuinely talk trash at each other because they want to win so bad that they're just going right at their teammates because they just have that fire desire to. I know it's March, but I'm taking a rep and I want to beat you. To see those guys competing against each other. It's not the competition of CJ Carr against Kenny Minchie and Steve Angeli and Blake Hebert and Anthony Rizak. It's more so I want to see that competition between Leonard Moore and Jaden Greathouse. I want to see that competition between Bryce Young and Emil Wagner. I want to see Charles Jagasaw going against Gabriel Rubio in a one-on-one and how the fire those two have to beat each other. Like, those are the things that I want to see, that competition of, man, we are out here to put in that work. And again, these all things like leadership leads to culture. Culture leads to this. They're all building blocks, Trev, towards sort of the personality of your football team. And you ask, how can the 2015 team and the 2017 teams be as good as they were? But that 2016 team right in the middle was so bad. Poor leadership, terrible culture, no drive to be the best you can be. Like that was the DNA of that team. The next year's team with mostly the same players, completely different DNA. Why? Better leadership, better culture, and then obviously far more competitive team. That was, yes, to a degree, there was some there were some coaching decisions that were made to bring in new coaches, but a lot of that was really player driven. It was Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey saying, yeah, that ain't going to happen again. It was just those it was Drew Tranquil and Tavon Coney being like, yeah, that's not going to happen again. And you had that player-led aspects that led to that team being super competitive. And I remember 2018, just watching in the spring of 2018, we knew something big was about to happen that fall when we watched Miles Boykin every day in practice just destroy Julian Love in practice. And you're just like, we know that guy over there, number 27, is really good. So if he's doing that to him in practice, then we know. And then Miles, you could just see the confidence in Miles growing every day that he was putting in work against Julian. And this isn't a knock on Julian Love. It's just like, dude, he's 5'10 and a half, and Miles Boykin is 6'4. Miles was finally playing to his potential. You just knew this fall is going to be a lot of fun, because remember, Miles hadn't done anything up to that point in time until the bowl game, what was it, the Champs Sports Bowl, right? Or no, it was the what was the Citrus Bowl? Yeah. He hadn't done anything in his career in a meaningful. I mean, he had played against Miami of Ohio here, but he hadn't done anything meaningful in his career until then. And then that was a launching point, and then you just saw it grow all spring. And it was, where did we see that? In those competitive periods where they were going at each other. That's where a team is made. Hey, look, you want your receivers to be better? Make sure your DBs are going at them and vice versa. And I remember talking to a defensive coach. So before this past season, I believe, talking about how much more better the competition was in that room with the receivers. Those are all things that you saw, and you're just like, they just battle more. They get after it more. Like, I don't know how good they're going to be, but those kids compete like crazy, and that makes us better. And those things are all important. We remember hearing from Mike Elko in 2017, talking about how, hey, we're getting ripped up now, but he's like, it's because of that line. But going against that line, I remember he called them, thinking like human lie detectors. If you don't bring it, that offensive line in 2017 they're going to expose you. But going against Quentin Nelson and Alex Bars and Mike McGlinchey and Sam Mustipher and Robert Hainsey and Tommy Kramer every day made that D-line so much better. And those are the things that you look for, Trev. And I can assure you that every great team I've coached on, there was a lot of times you'd get to Saturday and you're like, this is the easy part. Because we were going at each other all week. This is the easy part. Season was the easy part because we were going at each other all camp, and we knew we were going to face any DBs more athletic than Rob Rodriguez and the guys we had to face in practice. And those are things that you look at, and that's right. That's one of the things I love about the depth of this team is because you can actually have that type of competition. But that's another part of this spring that we're going to find out. Does this team compete the way? Because you start to see things from past teams, traits that kind of carry over. We saw it in 12, we saw it in 15, 17, 18, and maybe not so much in 19 or whatever. And you start to see those, and spring is when you start to see those. And a lot of it comes from how do these guys go at each other? Because if they're going at each other that hard, they're going to go hard at the other team. And that's a big part of the spring for me as well, Trev.
Competition's huge. It breeds success, and it elevates everybody around you, not just the person that you're going against. If you're a true competitor and you really strive to be the best version of yourself and you truly attack spring wanting to get better, there's other members within your position group that say, oh, yo, Jaden Greathouse is bringing it today. I need to step it up. Oh, man, Emil Wagner's bringing it today. I need to step it up as another member of the offensive line, not just, one-on-ones, inside run, RVA, 7-on-7, not just stuff like that. But that's what I love about competing. And it all ties into the culture of the team, the leadership there. That's more the leading by example. But if you are a true competitor, you're not going to sit back and let somebody be like, oh, yeah, like they're kind of balling out today. I'm going to let them have their day. It's like, well, no, let me get up there. Let me take my rep. It's time for me to compete. I want to show what I can do. And that's how teams continue to elevate. And then when you start talking about the depth of teams, man, you want to talk about why Alabama went on the run that they did. It's because a lot of their second stringers were better than the competition they were facing on Saturdays. At one point in time, Trayvon Diggs and Pat Surtain were the scout team corners that their starting receivers were going against. That's crazy. But Notre Dame is working to that. That's what's crazy. In the fall, there were teams in the past where Notre Dame has a defensive back unit of Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden and Cree Thomas and Carson Hobbs. You're like, yo, the starters are going to be pretty good this year. They're going to be fighting to get on the field because of Christian Gray and Leonard Moore. And you're going to have these starting wide receivers every single day in practice battling against potentially Jadon Blair and Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden and all them. But in the spring, I'm really excited to see what the competition's starting, what it's going to look like, because it's the players' first real chance to go out and compete since January 20th. And yeah, you compete in the winter workouts. We've seen the videos of tug of war, but it's different when you strap the pads on.
Yeah.
When you get that helmet and shoulder pads on, it's different. It's very different. And I can't wait.
Yeah. Well, you talk about that competitiveness, Trev, and you start mentioning like guys like Mark Zachary, and I was thinking about this. I've said this before, I believe, and sometimes I don't know if I said something on the air or in a conversation, so I'll repeat it. But 4 or 5 years ago, we're talking about Aeneas Williams being a starting running back at Notre Dame. We're talking about Preston Zinner maybe stepping into a starting role. We're talking about, man, I can't wait to see Bodie Cahoon in year 2. And man, what's Carson Hobbs going to be like now that he's a sophomore? These guys are as second and third year players be going into starting jobs on a lot of past Notre Dame teams that were pretty good.
Yeah.
And now it's like, what happened to Brendan Vernon? Is he not as good as we thought? Well, maybe it's just maybe, but maybe it's also, but look what he's competing against. They're pretty loaded. And that's kind of fun to think about as well. You talk about that competition, and it's like you're not going to have Malachi Fields this spring. You're not going to have Jordan Faison all the time. You're not going to have Will Pauling all the time. You're like, man, that's going to be tough. But you're still going to have Jaden Greathouse, KK Smith, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, Elijah Burris, Scrap Richardson, and Jerome Bennis Jr. Like, you're good. Leo Scheidler, who's one of my favorite walk-ons. Like, that kid is really talented for a walk-on. He was a starter on special teams for them last year, number 82. Like, that kid is as athletic as guys that I've seen get reps for Notre Dame in the last 20 years at wide receiver. Like, and that's the thing is like, yeah, the depth chart's thin at corner, but it's like, it's still Christian Gray, Leonard Moore, Carson Hobbs, and Cree Thomas. It's still going to be pretty good. And that's what kind of has me fired up, Trev. And then also seeing guys in new positions. How do they compete? How does Ben Minnick handle playing the nickel, along with Devontae Smith? If Jaden Greathouse plays more outside, how's he going to do? And that kind of leads into the next part, Trev, which is this is a time where as a team, you really focus on those areas for improvement. You know, you can't, you don't want to be stuck in a situation where we're in August and September. You're like, man, we need to really improve our third down package. You hope that you can, because compared to last year, you start doing that stuff now. And it's not so much that we're going to focus on all the things that need to be improved upon, but just like examples offensively for Mike Denbrock, this is going to be a huge period to work on your pass game. Because you're not going to be, going out, you got these new quarterbacks, you know what you can do running the football. There's periods where the offensive line can go work on their run game. But what were two of the biggest issues of the offense last year? They weren't a dynamic throwing team, and they weren't very good in pass pro. And you get 15 practices to work big time on that. And you can work on the run game stuff when you are able to do a little bit more bang bang in the fall. This is now a great time to really to work on your third down packages, as we mentioned. It's a great time to, hey, we want to do more, less 12 personnel, more 11 personnel. So what do we got to do to make adjustments in the run game structurally with those 11 personnel groups, maybe to our run game? We've got to work on doing this. We've got to work on doing that. Now's the time to work on that stuff and improve that stuff. And defensively, it's, hey, look, our run D's got to get better. So let's identify the areas we got to get better and then try to work on that. So, for Al Washington, it's like, hey, man, we really got to work a ton this spring on better gap discipline or block destruction, moving our feet through contact, resetting the line. The linebackers may say, hey, we got to really make sure that our fits are sound. Tackling technique is something you can work on a ton in the spring. It's not that you're tackling a ton, you're working on the technique of tackling a lot. And just being better finishers is something that its defense can certainly do. But like, this is the time for that, Trev. This is the time when a lot of those things get focused on. This is a big fundamental time. You can't, it's a great talking point, but when you're in the middle of the season, you can't focus every day on, okay, guys, let's make sure we spend the next 30 minutes doing a better job of getting off of the ball. There always has to be that improvement, but like, you've got to be focusing on, like, when I'm getting ready for a game as a receivers coach, yeah, there's fundamental things we work on every day, but we got a very limited time for that. Then it's, let's do install about how we're going to attack this specific defense we're facing and work on this new play call that we've put in for this specific defense. You don't have a lot of time for that. Hey, man, we're just going to break this thing down and just really get to the core principles here. That's what the spring is for. And I hope that that's something that we see a lot more of from the coaching staff. And that's a fun time, Trev, is you always wonder, like, man, why are they throwing this much in the spring? Are they going to throw the ball a lot more next year? No, that area needs more improvement, so it's getting more attention. And also, like, if you're not going to be as physical in the spring because of the longer season, this is not the time to say, hey, let's really work on our power run game. You know what I mean? Because you're not getting a great look. That's for the fall, and it doesn't mean you don't work on technique and foot drive and hand placement and all those things. But again, that's a fundamental thing, not so much a, hey, we're establishing a physicality of the run game in the spring. It may not be where you're at because, A, you're probably not going to have your starting offensive line play a single snap together. If Ashton Craig's going to start for your football team this spring, he ain't playing. So that's what I love about this time too, Trev, as a football coach, is it's a great, let's get back to basics to a degree and really focus on some of the things that we feel we need to be better at compared to last year, or we need to make sure we're focusing on this because we did lose so and so and so and so. We got to make sure these young bucks are prepared to handle the things they're going to need to do. And that's, I mean, that should be, as a coach, that should be the period you love, man. Like, if you don't have a passion for teaching the foundational, the fundamentals and just teaching kids the game at that foundational level, then, man, what are you doing? Like, you need to go coach in the NFL. Like, this is where you got to have it, especially with so many young guys on campus now. Yeah. And you've got so many transfers that, hey, just because a guy played D tackle somewhere else doesn't mean he knows the technique that you want, because it's not taught the same way everywhere. And that's what is a great period. And then the last one, Trev, and this is the most fun. This is our first crack at seeing the position battles that are actually the specific position battles that are going to rage. And I know that quarterback's going to get the most attention, but it's not the only one, man.
Sure isn't. Quarterback is going to draw a lot of attention, rightfully so. It's the first true quarterback competition under Marcus Freeman. I mean, really the first true competition at quarterback that Notre Dame has had since, 2016? Really?
Yeah, we debated that yesterday. Maybe 2018 because
Yeah.
but we knew Brandon was going to start the season at quarterback. We just didn't know if he was going to finish the season. So I don't, but Ian had to play well in order to position himself to then take over for Brandon. So being reserved 2018, and then
Sure.
before that 16, and then before that, it's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
2011. I
I
mean,
guess.
Tommy and Dane, right? Before that, it was like there was no competition with Jimmy. Evan Sharpley was never going to start over Jimmy Clausen for any period of time. You talk about how far this program has come. In 2007, you had true freshman Jimmy Clausen, Demetrius Jones, Zach Frazier, and Evan Sharpley at quarterback. It's a whole different animal now, man. It's a whole different animal now. It's a whole different animal.
No, it is.
But yeah, I mean, but even there, it's like, I think the competition at quarterback, Trevor, is going to have an impact on a lot of things we already talked about: leadership, culture, competition. It's just like it's going to have a big say. It really is. It really is. And like you said, quarterback competitions. We both played quarterback. Quarterback competitions can make or break a team's locker room, and not by who wins, but how it's handled. The 2016 quarterback competition was not handled well. Whether you think the right guy started or not, the reality is it was handled in a way where it fractured the locker room. And that played a role and that's not on Deshaun or Malik. That part of there's other things that are on them. That Deshaun was just a bad leader and just in all the things. So about Malik didn't handle what happened well. That created problems. But that all lays at the feet of Brian Kelly, who put them all in that situation where that team really struggled. The quarterback competition created a void in leadership. It created a cultural problems in the locker room. The notion of being in a true competition was just out the window because everybody that paid attention knew it wasn't a real competition, and it fractured that team. And that's why a team that with those type of players went 4-8. And then there's other times when a quarterback battle can galvanize a football team because, boy, these guys are all getting after it, and we have confidence in whoever the coaches pick because they're all leading, they're all working hard, they all have great attitudes, and we're going to find out who that guy is. And that's partly on the players and partly on the coaches, but it'll have a big say in that. But it's these other ones that we're not talking about as much that I find interesting, Trev. But I do wonder if position battles mean as much nowadays than they used to outside of quarterback and the offensive line. Because teams play so much depth now, I don't know that position battles outside of the O-line and quarterback really have as much impact. Like they don't mean as much as they used to because it's like whoever starts between Bryce Young and Josh Burnham, it's irrelevant because they're both going to play and play a lot. They're both going to be very important players. Does it matter if Bubakar's on the field first or Jordan Pateljo's on the field first or Junior Chamaka's on the field first? They're all going to play. Does it matter if Donovan Heinisch is on the field first or Jared Dawson's on the field first? Not really. They're both going to play. And so maybe corner, maybe is the other one.
Just about to say corner, probably. Just because, and maybe it's just specific to Notre Dame now. I don't know how many other teams routinely will rotate their field and boundary guys off, but I'm just looking at Notre Dame's sample size, and really since 22, they haven't had corners that they would just rotate. I mean, I don't know who you're going to put on the field instead of Cam Hart and Ben Morrison in 22 and 23, and then even in 23, Christian Gray snuck on there a couple times, made impact plays while he was out there.
Jaden Mickey played.
Jaden Mickey played, but it's not enough for it to be a true, rotation.
They were breather rotation players. That's what they were. They weren't like the D tackle rotation was, the D end rotation was, and especially the linebacker rotation this year. Where it's like, none of those guys are giving Drake Bowen a breather. They're not giving Jack Kaiser a breather. They're on the field to make plays. Not hopefully you don't get gashed while the starter's catching his breath. I mean, that's kind of what it was. You know what I mean? It's like,
honestly,
like running back. It's like it used to be where like you'd bring a guy in for a series to spell the starter so he doesn't wear down. Now it's like, crap, they brought 24 in. It's like It's
Yeah.
like if you're a middle linebacker, number 20 comes in, you're like, crap, I might have to go out wide and try to cover this guy now. It's just
I
like
know.
it's a different animal than it used to be, man. At a lot of positions where it used to be like you won a starting job, you were the starter, and then the other guy just kind of came in to spell you. It's
Mhm.
different now, and that's why I say that the competitions for 2 and 3 a lot of times are even more important or impactful than 1 and 2. They're not as
Mhm.
sexy. If we did a show like we're going to talk about all the position battles for the 2 and 3 spots, like nobody'd watch. But I'm like, yeah, but those are going to have a lot more of an impact than who's going to be going for the number 1 at that position, because we know the guy that's number 1 is going to play, but who's going to play with him? I remember watching in 2022, there was a couple games, Trev, where they would bring in the backup D line. And I never understood why Al Golden did this with that team. They'd bring in the backup D line, and you could almost count almost every time when he put in the entire, he would like mass substitute the D line. And it seemed, it's just how I perceived it, but it seemed like every time he did that, the other team would go right down the field and move the ball and score. And you're just like, dude, I know what you're trying to do, but you got to mix and match this a little bit. Like was it 2018, they would start Jerry Tillery and John Bonner. And then the rest of the game, Jerry Tillery was always on the field with Myron Tagovailoa-Mosa for the most part. And then John Bonner was usually on the field with, no, it was the other, excuse me. Jerry was on the field with Kurt Heinisch, who was the nose. And then Bonner, who was the starting nose, would be on the field a lot with Myron Tagovailoa-Mosa. There'd be times when the two starters would be on the field together and times when the two younger guys were on the field together. But for the most part, you had that mix and match there. Well, last year that wasn't an issue. There'd be times where they'd have the backup D line in the game, and then one or two of the backup linebackers, and you almost didn't notice it. A, because they did it so much, but B, because when they were bringing in backups, those backups were pretty flippin' good, and they were impact players, and that's a big difference in this football team now, just from 3 years ago in Marcus Freeman's first year, where when Isaiah Foskey went off the field, there was a big drop-off between Isaiah Foskey and whoever was coming in to replace him. And that was true on the O-line, corner, D-line, I mean, all those positions. Now it's kind of like, all right, I don't care. I mean, like Viper this year, it's like you're going to have Jordan Patelho,
Mhm.
Boubacar Traore, Junior Tilamaka, and Logan Thomas. I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
well, what about this guy? I'm good. I'm good with all those guys in different capacities. So that's what kind of has me fired up about this team. But those position battles, though, Trev, they're going to start now and they're going to carry into the fall in a lot of cases. They're going to have a lot of say on what this team looks like. Quarterback obviously being one, but a lot of these offensive line, these position battles could determine like we could say, okay, right now I anticipate Anthony Knapp being the left tackle and Charles Jagusah being the right guard. And we'll talk about a little bit about right guard here later. But what if Sullivan Absher's so good that you're like, dude, he's got to play? Well, you're not going to play him over Jagusah because that all of a sudden impacts the tackle position. And you see what I'm like, all these, you could say, hey, look, we're going to start Charles Jagusah left tackle. But let's say Anthony Knapp has a monster breakout spring or Gerby Lambert has a big breakout spring. You're like, dude, we got to get that guy on the field too. So we're going to move him inside the guard. There's all these things that can happen that are sort of a
Mhm.
domino of somebody showing themselves. And the spring is a lot of times when that starts to happen. It's like this guy starts to show off like, uh-oh, this guy's got a little something,
Mhm.
and then it carries over and bleeds into the fall.
I like it because it's about building out rotations. Now, in this day and age of college football, where you're playing 14 to 16 games in any given season, you're having multiple bye weeks, and you have conferences like the SEC where it just feels like the majority of all their schedules are tough. Notre Dame's schedule is getting more tough. Ohio State opens up their season against Texas, and you're having to play more and more people. You're having to reach farther and farther down onto the depth chart, and so that is what I'm excited to see about some of these position battles. Is it's not necessarily who's going to be. Yes, you can still look at it for depth chart purposes of who's going to be number 2, who's going to be number 3. I look at it as building out the rotation, because now you start looking at the offense and defense, and it's a lot more than, all right, well, who's the starting 11 going to be? On offense, really, it's like, okay, who are going to be like the 16 to 18 guys that are just going to play a lot? outside of quarterback and offensive line. On defense, it's more of, okay, it's not just the starting 11. It's kind of, who are the 19 to 20 guys that are going to be playing a lot of snaps? What is the linebacker rotation going to look like? We're going to have somewhat of an idea, but Madden Faramo's been here since the Georgia Bowl prep, going through practice, same as Jadon Blair. That's going to be interesting. Preston Zinner, is he a kid that you can continue to keep off the field if you don't move him? I don't know if you can. Bodie Cahoon, Teddy Rizak, on top of all the talent that you have. At safety, yes, Jalen Stroman, he's a part of the program. Can't practice because he's still recovering from his.
He's doing all the workouts and stuff. Like, he's in the workout, but he won't be doing I'm curious to see, like, does he in street clothes? Like, is he in actually just go through drills? I'm curious to see what that's going to be. But like you said, he's not going to be taking any one-on-one reps. He's not going to be doing it. I mean, he's out for the spring. I don't think he'll be doing anything contact related. He's with the team. He's working out, but he won't be practicing.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to be really interested to see what that safety battle is going to start looking like. And I view battles like it's the process of setting the rotation. I don't think it's going to be as clear cut. I see a lot of questions and get some questions on the board on some of the pieces that I put up. Like, do you think if they have a good enough spring, they'll be the starter? And I've been saying this a lot after a lot of the conversations I've had with you, Bryan, and it's always, look, pay attention to the snaps. Pay attention to how much people rotate in and play. And the safety is going to look a lot different than it did last year. You're not taking Xavier Watts off the field. That's why Rod Hurd would rotate in sometimes. You're not really taking a Don off. You're not taking Xavier off. But this season, it's going to be a little bit more of, okay, they're going to rotate that position a little bit more. So who are the 2 to 3 guys that they feel confident that they can keep putting them in? That's what I'm looking forward to seeing in the spring. Is it's now a set list of players, not just the one guy who's, well, this is our starter, and when they're tired, they'll come out for a series or whatever. And that's what's going to be fun, is who is going to keep earning more and more of the coach's trust as these 15 practices go along.
That's what I love about the spring, Trev. It's our really first crack to start to see, as we said, this is what this 25 team is going to look like. We start to get a glimpse of that now. We're going to talk, that's kind of part one of our show. Next, we're going to get into talking about what we want to see this spring. And so Trevor and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll get into kind of what we know, what we don't know about this team. And the what we know part is you got to build on. What we don't know is you got to improve upon, or you got to find answers for. So we'll get to that. Before we do, folks, see that little thumbs up button right down there below? Go ahead and hit the like button on that. We would greatly appreciate that. It lets us know that you support what we're doing. And another way you can support what we're doing is make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, not just the Irish Breakdown podcast, but also the CFB Nation podcast. We put our show up breaking down the top 10 quarterbacks on our CFB Nation YouTube channel and our CFB Nation podcast. And I'll have some shows coming up all week that Bill and Bill have done the last couple of weeks as well, that I'm going to be able to get up on the CFB Nation channel, YouTube channel as well. So you're going to want to check that out. Just all those different ways you can support us at Irish Breakdown. But of course, best way to support us is sign up for the message boards. We had 2 people sign up for gold memberships yesterday. I'm going to respond to those emails today. I was a little slammed with all the pot of gold stuff yesterday and then doing the show, but I'm going to get to those today, get caught up on the emails today. But you can always sign up for a message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.